Hello, my name is Daniel Mosier. I'm working on my Eagle Scout project, an oral history of the city of Kettering. I'm joined today by Mr. Ragan. Mr. Ragan, could you introduce yourself and describe your participation, the role in which you serve Kettering City Government?
Okay. First of all, I'm honored to be asked to be interviewed. I have a grandson who is an Eagle Scout. In fact, I have two grandsons who are Eagle Scouts in Florida. So I wish you well on your project. I served in the early 70s as a city councilman for Kettering and had lived in Kettering for a number of years and was asked to consider running for election and was successful. And I think one thing that assisted me in becoming a councilman in Kettering was my interest and my skill level in finance and accounting. And I was able to understand quite a bit about the finances of the city at that time and was honored to be of service.
So you're kind of like a financial expert on the council. They turned to you and needed explanations or anything like that? Or how
well, I wouldn't call myself an expert. Okay. However, it was interesting, and just an anecdote, sitting next to me was Bob Macarius, who's now deceased, but he was an architect, and sometimes an issue would come before council that required a small sketch to understand a zoning issue or something like that. And I'd say, Bob, what do you think? Sketch that out for me a little bit. And he would do that. And sometimes there would be a financial issue, and he said, what do you think the proper payoff would be on that? And I would provide him with that.
That's interesting.
So we worked together.
Definitely a symbiotic relationship there. What was the time period like in which you served? You mentioned the early 70s. What was going on in the world during that time? What was going on in Kettering more specifically? I
think Kettering was at an early stage of growth at that time, and the school system was quite large then, and many school children, many young families, and people were vitally interested in their homes at that time and their streets and what amenities the city could provide. And I think it was a time in national history where the country was undergoing concerns in the world as to what the role of the United States would be. I know shortly after I became a city councilman, I went to a council of meeting down that happened to be held in Puerto Rico. And down there, when we arrived, the Puerto Rican people were chanting in the street and marching, "Yankees go home." So we, even at that time, were not well thought of in the world in some regards. And we were providing wonderful service to the people of the world as a nation.
Certainly. That's interesting, yeah. Maybe are there other events or world events, national events, state events that affected Kettering during your time of service? The 70s, of course, like any decade, there were national events going on, world events that were very major. Maybe what were some of these events and did they affect Kettering?
I think one of the things that affected Kettering during that time was the need for cities and municipalities to become more financially dependent upon themselves rather than the state providing and the national budget providing for them. And so the incidence of income tax coming into play in the city to provide the kind of services that people wanted was beginning to increase, and people were aware of this. It was not always easy to ask people for changes like that, but in order to provide the necessary services, the services that people required for the kind of comfort level that they wanted in the city of Kettering, these revenues had to be raised. And I think that was because the states and the national were cutting back on their providing for these kinds of funds.
Excellent. Now, how did Kettering change during your time of service during the early 70s? Maybe you could talk about how it was when you got on council, what it was like then, and maybe how it changed during your time of service to the end point of your service.
Well, I remember one significant factor that was involved in the city of Kettering in this time, and that was just take for example the volunteer fire force. During that time and prior to that time, it was quite easy to get volunteer firemen during the evening hours and at night because there were people that were working during the day and would serve on the fire force at night. And there were people that were working at night because of the second and third shifts, and therefore they could serve during the day. But as time went along and industry had to change and cut out those second and third shifts, it became difficult then to find day workers on the fire force. And therefore that was kind of the beginning of hiring more full-time fire force people during the day. And there was a need then for the city to develop that particular function and to acquire people to provide the safety necessary for the citizens.
And that's still a debate that's kind of going on today. I've been interviewing other gentlemen as well, current councilmen. They've been talking about how the fire debate is still going on, whether to go completely full-time or to stick with the partially volunteer and partially full-time. So that's interesting to see how that's still going on 30 years later.
But the change in industry at that time is what really precipitated the need to think in terms of more full-time people.
Okay, so that would make it different then. Now, since you finished your service, how has the city changed from then until now? Of course, there's been a lot of development, a lot of building changes, but how has maybe the city as a whole changed, maybe the people, the demographics, I guess you'd say?
I think during the time since I served, which has been a long time now, the city population has probably aged, and people liked Kettering, and so for many years they chose to stay after they moved up in years of age and retired and stayed. And we saw a decline in the school enrollment, and not as many young families. I think also the need for a second income in the family has caused the women to become more a part of the workforce. And this has created challenges not only for the school system, but for the city in providing services that apply to these particular unique situations. So I think that kind of a change in the society generally has impacted city life.
Of course. Now, despite the changes that have taken place over these years, the building, the Phrase Pavilion and the Lincoln Park development, the Rec Center, all these developments, the redevelopment of Hills and Dale Shopping Center, tearing down, just all this buildings in the recent years. The face of Kettering has changed significantly since that time period, but maybe what has remained the same about it? Some common denominator between the Kettering of the past and the Kettering of the present?
I think one of the common denominators that I see in the city is what I would call the values. The family values, the feelings that people have toward community, toward others, service. I think those things have remained the same. And I think people generally in the population now are still interested in seeing to the welfare of their fellow person. And I know I'm a member of the Kettering Rotary Club, and we provide service to the community. And we have great support in the city of Kettering for our service club. And I think this is long-standing. Our service club is 40 years old. So that in itself shows what used to be and what is now. And so there are certain values like that that continue.
And you're definitely not the only service club in Kettering. There's always the QNS and the Optimist Club. Both of those exist. So that shows the spirit of the city and volunteering and such. This is kind of a question I like to ask. Maybe say you went somewhere else, somewhere not Kettering, of course. Maybe somewhere where they hadn't heard of Kettering. A person who hadn't heard of it and asked you where you were from. I'm from Kettering. Kettering, what's that like? What's that city like? How are the people? So how would you really describe Kettering to someone who asked you that?
Well, I think the way I would describe it currently is a group of people who are younger now than what they were 20 years ago. And as these families retired and stayed here and unfortunately have passed on, then the younger families that came on from them have come on the scene, occupied the residences. More new families are coming in, and I think the school enrollment is growing. And kind of a revitalization of the city as it continues to exist here and provides new services to its citizens. And I think this is because of the younger group coming on, and I think that's really vital and exciting.
So maybe what would you tell a person? What makes Kettering special? You decided to live here and you decided to serve as a councilman. So maybe what made you want to live here, I guess?
I guess initially we liked the housing. We liked the housing, and the first home that we ever owned we bought here in Kettering, having come out of the military, and it was an economical place to buy. Had good employment, even though I worked in the city of Dayton at that time. This suburban community provided the amenities that we seemed to like, and I think that the school system was certainly an attractive thing to us with the 3 children that we had. The city has always had, I think, the citizens at heart. And through the years, I've known many of the council people, the mayors, the city managers, and they've always had not an agenda of their own, but an agenda that was provided them by the citizens to which they listened.
Well, that's excellent, and that kind of reminds me, in talking to some other people as well, they seem to mention that Kettering has always seemed to have been blessed with good leadership, with leaders that have the interests of the citizens at heart. Would you say that's a true statement, and maybe could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think I did, and the people that I've known since, even up to our current mayor, Mr. Patterson, I think these are people who are willing to provide the service and the time commitment. If you take the amount of time divided by the pay, 85 cents an hour is typical.
It's depressing.
That you might earn, but that's not the reason you serve. You don't serve for the financial reward. You serve for the sense of being a contributing person, and it's not that you rise to great importance, but you do provide some significance to living and to your own life.
Now, you've lived in Kettering. I'm assuming that you have for
a number of years.
For a number of years, definitely, yeah. Kettering in the past decade or so has seen businesses leave, like the Frigidaire plant and Desi, things like that. And now currently with the Delphi situation, with Delphi looking like it might go, it might stay, kind of changing by the minute, not really sure what's going to happen. What do you see for the future, maybe of Delphi, and then maybe you could talk about also what you see for the future of the city of Kettering itself.
Okay. I am not disturbed particularly about these changes. I always hate to see people lose their employment.
Certainly.
And this tugs at our heart when we see this, because people don't like to be uprooted and have to change. However, the city has always seemed to recover through its innovative, creative approach to developing new uses of space. And I think especially under Mr. Huseman, the city manager for many years here, the use of the facilities that have been vacated because of business leaving has been very good. And most of the projects that we have now redeveloped seem to be filling up with tenants, and those all produce revenue for the city. So I think not only is it live and productive and really providing significance and service, but it's also providing revenue for the city.
So yeah, what do you really see maybe for the future of the city, maybe the next decade or so? The population has, it kind of peaked during the 70s and then leveled off and actually decreased quite a bit, maybe in the 90s as people have aged and decided to stay here, so that prevents younger families from moving into the city. The housing wasn't really available for them. Maybe population trend, what do you see happening with that? I mean, if you really have an opinion on the matter.
I think there'll always be those peaks and valleys. And I think right now, as I understand it, there is a slight upturn in the population age. So there are more young families coming in with children, and I see a bright future in that regard.
So what about for the rest of the city? Maybe what do you, if you keep up on these things, of course I'm assuming that you do, What do you see in the near future for the city? Do you see the continuing to rebuild, revitalize, upgrade things? What do you see?
Well, I think the city is of an age that the city involvement in maintaining the infrastructure is going to be more important, because as the city ages, there are certain parts of the city that need attention.
Right.
And the basic infrastructure, the need for housing rebuilding, the need for new and better structures in commercial part of the city are there, and I'm sure the city will address those needs.
Great. Well, Mr. Ragan, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me today and providing your insights into your service. So,
thank you very much for inviting me.
I definitely appreciate you joining me.
Quite an honor.
Yeah, be sure to tune in for the next segment of An Oral History of the City of Kettering. I'm Daniel Mosier.